Satyameva Jayate represents the highest sacred ideal. It's also a little bit of a travesty that in the constitution that recognized this, we were not able to look at the full sentence. The full sentence, if you go back to the source, says Satyameva Jayate na anritam. Says truth alone triumphs, but not something that is not Rita. So this gives us the central civilizational idea of what is Rita. What is that the ancestors were trying to tell us? And why is that eternal? When we talk about culture, all the introduction, of course, in your generosity of spirit, you try and make it sound good. But the way I look at my work is basically sitting on the shore of this vast wisdom called Hindu civilization and trying to collect whatever pebbles that we can, and that's all we can do in one lifetime. The liberty that a Hindu has, and this is the highest form of liberty, is that he can always say, it's only a Hindu who can say, in this lifetime I have chosen to do this. Because you know that you will come back till the time you are fully transcending. So that is actually the highest liberty, because you are not then bound by time. You are bound by Rita. This is a central idea to actually understand, because Rita is the fundamental idea that underpins everything else in this civilization. What we call Dharma is actually a later manifestation of that principle. And I am not a scholar trained in Sanskrit or Shastras. I sit at the feet of such masters and learn. But I learned about Rita from a favorite Telugu lyric writer, my inspiration, Sitaram Shastri Garu. And I would say that he has actually found a way to infuse the highest Hindu wisdom and metaphysics into the everyday commercial song of Telugu cinema. And in one particular song, he talks about what does it mean to be in consonance. What does unity really mean? He says, look at the planetary positioning itself. And this is how the ancestral Hindu mind also worked when we talk about culture, when we talk about continuity. The ancestors were looking at the world, they were gazing at the sky, and they asked this question, what is this intelligence, or what is this fundamental sacred sentiment that seems to be driving everything to a rhythm? The word rhythm also is closely correlated with Rita, if you look at it. And then he explains, if you understand the planetary position, we have at this point, doesn't matter what Elon Musk is trying to tell us, he's trying to say that we can go to the next planet. Hopefully we'll discover life there, hopefully all of that will happen. But at this point in time, despite Musk and despite everything else, the only planet where there is life is this planet, this Earth. So we have to first figure out what we're going to do here. And he says, life is possible on planet Earth only because it is at the exact distance from sun where sunlight actually becomes life nourishing. If you don't have sunlight, you don't have life. So if Earth was a little closer to sun, we would have been burnt because the intensity would have been too much. If it was a little away, you would not have life because it's not enough sunlight to actually give life. Rita is this planet Earth maintaining its position. It is doing its job of revolving around itself and revolving around sun. Sun is where he is, and this motion, this continuous motion, which is then giving, he writes about it beautifully in several songs. He talks about how this fundamental aspect became the dream of Brahma, and how from the dream of Brahma the world was born, and how this rhythm is the one that actually wakes us up with the birds singing across the eastern sky. Now this is so poetic. If you understand what this is, you're trying to understand what is the fundamental rhythm of life. So when we talk about dharma, when I talk about culture, when we talk about sacred in everyday, sacred in organizations, sacred in politics, it is to understand what is the Rita. Satyameva Jayate na anritam. Rita is this tune that nature already is in. And as long as we are able to tune ourselves into that, things will sustain. And dharma is that which sustains. So basically, Rita is the blueprint, and dharma is the socio-political, economic, cultural organization which is in tune with this. Which is why in the Indian lexicon, if you look at Indian languages, you have words like Ritucharya, Dinacharya. What are these ideas telling us? What is culture? Culture is not travel, food, dress, selfie. That's how modernity sells culture as. But culture in its Indian Hindu sense is aligning yourself with that which sustains. And it is fundamentally the most sincere form of any well-being, because all of us will go through life with multiple ups and downs. Right? Now, the question at a human level is, what do we think of dharma as sustainability when life topples us? And that's where you truly understand what Satyameva Jayate Na Anritam is. So many lives go into Anritam because we are not able to make sense of why this is happening. And this is a fundamental human predicament because on one hand, nature has given us this ability, evolution has shaped us with this ability to be aware of our own thoughts. Right? We are the only species, as we know at this point, which is able to reflect back on its own thinking. The whole story, Upanishadic story of the two birds comes to mind. One bird is engaging in the world, which is the world of senses, and another bird is watching this bird engage in the senses, which is actually what we understand as Atman. Right? Now, this idea that there is redemption in the everyday life, as long as we are tuned into the rhythm, is what we understand as Dharma. This is culture. And it has been simplified. You don't need to worry so much about the esoteric connotations of this. If you just follow what has been given to you as grandmother's wisdom in this land, if you look at how they manage their kitchen, if you look at how they manage their family, what we talk as festivals, how do we look at time? How do we look at seasons? Why do we say in this season you should do this? Why do we say in this season this god comes in this form? All of these are the civilizational mechanisms available to us to make sense of our own life so that we don't topple over. Because life will undeniably be hard, right? So what we call culture is this set of truths that come down to us as behavioral norms, as practices, as attitudes, as predispositions, as communication. All of this is what we call culture. Right? Unfortunately, what's happening is, and this is the effect that we'll have to deal with of globalization. There are certain forces which are not in tune with this rhythm. Right? When you look at the nature of economic development, fundamentally as it is today, when we talk about culture has been sidelined because we live in a world where everything has been monetized, right? And nothing that has not been monetized has any value. And this is a central concern because as humans, it has given you this idea that you need to go out and chase. The intelligence and evolutionary mechanism has given you this idea that you have to go and actually, you have to shape some things, right? But you also have a deep longing for a different dimension of your life, which is the deeper inner spiritual dimension. And since we are the only ones who are aware of our thought, we have this fundamental and continuous predicament that on one hand, we want to go into this Indriya Sukha, and on the other hand, we also know that this Sukha is not permanent. There is something deeper that you need to find within yourself, right? So this is the difference between, and this is now extrapolated into a global system, what we understand as economic system today, what we see in politics, what we see in international relations, is basically a global culture that has missed this rhythm. Simply put, if you look at what is natural, for example, if you plant a tree, it takes its own time to sprout. So your economic system has to be arranged according to that natural cycle. It has to understand that this is the time it takes for it to be sustainable because nature is already experimented with what works, right? Now the economic system or the technocratic system is to try and, in the name of efficacy, accelerate. And why do we accelerate? We accelerate because we think development is the process of consuming more. That is how it's been framed, right? And in this process of consuming more, we are also saying that this is the fundamental aim of good life. A good life is where you are able to deploy technology to transfer one form of material into another material that you can consume. Now, is this really sustainable for 10 billion people or 8 billion people, whatever? This is the question that we have. The question of culture and why it is essential to global future is fundamentally this, because the systems that we are now in are not sustainable, which is why you see crisis of immigration, which is why you see war, which is why you see inequality, which is why you see mental health crisis, which is why you see ecological crisis. What are these crises? This entire set of crises is not different, disparate things. They're all coming from the fundamental same problem of human being not being able to understand what is the difference between transient and intransient. From our Hindu wisdom, if you were to ask who is a wise person, the Upanishads and the Smriti text will tell you Viveka, somebody who has a developed sense of discrimination between right and wrong. between permanent and impermanent. The fundamental one-line sentence that we get is Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka. It is such a powerful thing for any leadership, for any culture to understand. Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka. That is wisdom. To understand what is permanent and what is transient, and to drive your behavior towards those that are permanent, which is what sustainability is. Because you don't have this fundamental truth in the global discourse today, because you don't have a means of understanding how to develop this viveka in you, you chase the anitya. And as much as we chase the anitya, we will actually borrow from the future. What we are doing today as economic development in most cases is basically depriving our next generations of things that they should have. And this is why you see so much of tension between generations today. Look at what happened in Europe. Look at Brexit. Brexit has caused a lot of antagonism in the British society, amongst that, the native society there, because most young people saw Brexit as a verdict given by elders against their future. They said, you have decided to pull us out of Europe. You don't have any right because you're already 40, 50, whatever years old. You have lived your life. But my mobility, my economic prosperity, my ability to interact with other cultures is restricted because you have become insular. There's a great tension there in that land. And then remember, Brexit happened after the greatest experiment in the world ever of European Union. At the end of World War II, Europe suddenly had this viveka, a movement of viveka, where it said we've been fighting for thousands of years and we now have nuclear weapons. We cannot be fighting anymore because we will perish. And so a great experiment of bringing all of them together, warring nations, warring tribes, together as modern nation states into one compact as European Union. And it took just 70 years for that to break.